So we come to the end of our 4-week journey through Ruth. It's been exciting. It's been an interesting exposition of restoration and rehabilitation and redemption. And it's got me thinking, of course, of Happy Valley. Because everything has got me thinking of Happy Valley the last few weeks. Kim talked about binge watching box sets last week, and I love to do that, but this has been, you can't do that. We have to wait a week for the next thing. And you could have gone home and binge read all of the book of Ruth, but you've needed to wait to see what we're going to unpack out of it. There's something good about waiting. And I can't spoil it for you because I don't know either. The whole country is on tenterhooks waiting to see what happens. And if you haven't seen it, I mean, it's a difficult watch and worth having a go at. But at the heart of it is this relationship between young Ryan and his nan, Catherine. And Ryan, in the story, doesn't have the best start in life. If you're not familiar with it, he's the product of a traumatic relationship. And his mum dies just after he's born, and the rest of the family then don't want anything to do with this young lad. He's a reminder of violence and what took their daughter or their sister from them. But not Catherine. She says, no, it's not his fault. I will love him. I will raise him. And she does. It's a picture, whatever else is going on in Happy Valley, of steadfast love, of real commitment, of working that stuff out, standing by one another. And it doesn't surprise me that it's a really popular drama, nor does it surprise me that this book, our Bible, which speaks to us about God and about who we are, contains so many stories of steadfast love and of redemption and of somehow good eventually coming from the most difficult of starts. And that's much of what we see unfolding in Ruth 4. I promise I'm going to link those things for you. We're going to have a look at various bits of Ruth 4. I could easily do you an hour and a half on this, and I won't. So there's lots that you might want to look at, and lots that you go, hang on, he's hardly mentioned this stuff. If there's stuff that we haven't covered that you knew you were looking forward to, go, surely he's going to talk about sandals. I'm not. Write those things down, put them on an AMA, and we'll get to them soon. And nor do we have time for much of a previously in Ruth, because I banged on about Happy Valley. Suffice it to say, it comes in your Bible just after Judges, so do read Ruth. In fact, do read Judges, because this is the bit in the Bible where that's happening. It'll tell you something about biblical society at that time. And go back and catch up with what John and Richard and Kim and Sue have had to say so far. But so far, Ruth, this returning Moabitess, has come back with her mother-in-law, Naomi. Ruth's husband has died, who was Naomi's son. Naomi's husband has died. Lots of people are dead. They've come back with nothing, but now Ruth has made this connection with Boaz, who is wealthy and is going to look after them, and he's kind of a relative enough that he can do that and redeem this inheritance they've got of land, and also marry Ruth, which will sort things out. That's all gone on up to now, and at the beginning of chapter 4, we see Boaz going off saying, right, I will sort this. Leave this with me, I'll take care of this. And he starts negotiating with this chap who's not named, making sure that Boaz gets to be the redeemer and not him, which will involve paying off some debt and then also marrying Ruth. And this will be at cost to himself. This is why the other chap doesn't want to do it. It's going to cost him some money, and it's going to cost him some of his legacy. It's a significant impact going down the line. And yet Boaz is prepared to do that. He's prepared to pay that price. Somehow it involves this sandal and a bunch of men sorting stuff out between themselves. You could spend a good few hours just on these ancient laws about how when somebody dies, their brother has to look after other people, and it's weird and it's patriarchal, but it was the system, and you've got to have some way of doing that, I guess, before we had state pensions and ways of looking after each other. Much can be said. If we started, though, if you just had this chapter read in Ruth, you would think that perhaps Ruth is this woman who is done to and about while men sort out problems. There's a sense of passivity and helplessness, right? And I think that points to me the danger of reading the Bible in little chunks like this. If you haven't been in the previous few weeks, you might not have caught the story. But is passive and helpless a good description of Ruth in the rest of the book so far? By no means. Right? Ruth has been active. She's been sorting stuff out. She has been bending the rules, advocating for herself and Naomi, and getting stuff done. We're stuck with the men having sorted out because that's just the rules. You know, if the men didn't say, right, I'll do this, you do that, that'll be how society around here works, it wouldn't be official. They kind of had to rubber stamp things. But this is still the outworking of Ruth as a main actor, someone with agency at the forefront of the story and the action. The book of Ruth, for all that it might not seem here, easily passes the Bechdel test. If you're not aware of that, this test that in Hollywood films, are the women ever talking to each other about anything other than the men in it? And it's easily done in this. It's a good book for feminists by its time. And I think that's a reminder of the wonderful complexity of Scripture, of how the Bible challenges and contradicts itself and offers clues within itself to this generous spirit of interpretation. For more on that, I'm going to point you to Richard's sermon on the whole of Ruth that we looked at evening worship. Suffice it to say that though the Bible might seem to be a rigid patriarchal book, and it certainly comes from that sort of a time, it contains far more story than it does lists of rules. And those stories consistently elevate women and foreigners and widows, the least and the marginalized and the other. And these stories show that such rules as there are not the be-all and end-all of biblical law. They're more of what you might term a moral flaw. You must do at least this much. It's like what Jesus says. Your righteousness must surpass that of those who follow the rules we heard in the gospel. And the stories give examples of people going above and beyond, and they illuminate and expand those lists of rules. In fact, I say that's what's in the Bible. There is no such thing as the Bible, is there? That word, when we first had it, that we've reduced down to the word Bible, was biblias, which is plural. It's the books. This thing was called the books for a long time. It's a library, it's a collection. And we know that. It isn't one coherent thing, but it's made of these many intertwining and overlapping threads that all somehow together point to God. And we only see how those threads work together, how it challenges itself, if we know it in bigger chunks. If we don't read the whole of the book of Ruth, you'd have a warped perspective on this story, that it's about men, but it isn't. If you don't read the whole of the Bible, you won't know which other bits it's picking up. You won't know about those laws about marriage. Knowing the whole of it, we see a much fuller picture. Anyway, business being done, moving on, the second half of the reading, Boaz announces this wedding, and the people at the gate are delighted, and they pray this blessing over Boaz and his bride-to-be. We're witnesses, may the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel. May you produce children in Ephrathah, bestow a name in Bethlehem, and through the children that the Lord will give you by this young woman, may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. More women name-checked there. If you know your Bible, if you're familiar with the book of Genesis, if I was to turn up at your wedding or your children's wedding and say, may this union be like that of Leah and Rachel, how would you feel about that? Not so happy, right? Leah and Rachel were both married to the same man. They spent their marriage desperately having children as quickly as they could to outdo each other, jealous of each other and of their maidservants that they each had, Bilhah and Zilpah, just in competition to be the favoured wife, to know that they were loved by having had more children as sisters married to the same man. Through them, we get the 12 tribes of Israel, and there's a rich, beautiful story that comes out. That's how the whole people of God get started. But it wasn't a very good picture of a marriage, and I would not want to be in a marriage like that. To be like Leah and Rachel is a mixed blessing at best. The women go on to say, may your house be like that of Perez bore to Judah and Tamar. I don't know if you know that story. Do you know the story of Tamar? You come across that? I'm glad that some of us who are younger wearing headphones. It's a very not safe for work story, the story of Tamar. And you should go back and read it. It's in Genesis 38, and it is not in the lectionary. So unless you choose to go off book, you are not going to hear it read in church. it is not one that we can unpack, even mentioning it in the intergenerational service later. It's the tale of a woman left behind by these rules. And Parish is born out of sex where, before consent had really been an issue, there's incest in the story, there's the manipulation of people of power by people at the bottom end of the power structure, trying to hold people to account. It is not a pretty story, and yet out of that comes this child and this family line in which all of this stands. And it is the story of Tamar doing everything she can to make sure that she and her child are counted in God's family, that it gets worked out, that she isn't pushed to one side. She is, doing what she has to, bending the rules, holding people to account. And from that, we get the whole line in which Boaz stands. And therefore, as we know from the genealogy, in which David stands and then Jesus stands, these women stuck in difficult situations, doing the things that they need to do that otherwise you might think are naughty and frowned on by the Bible, are cherished and celebrated here. But it is something of a mixed blessing. And that's before we get to Ruth, who we know is a Moabitess. I don't know if you know the story of Moab. He doesn't get much of a mention, but you know the story of Lot. And that's another bit that's not in the lectionary. Again, go back, it's in the Go Deeper. Go back and read Genesis 19, another not safe for work story about Lot and his two daughters driven away to safety. And they are left without access to men because Lot is too sad to do that, and they sort things out in manners that, again, I'm not going to mention in present company. But that whole house, starting in difficult circumstances as it did, we see folded back into the line of Israel. It's another story of redemption, of a thing starting poorly, being redeemed. I think it's amazing that if we're familiar with just one book, if you're familiar with Genesis, which I've just finished doing my whole Bible in a year bit, and we just did Genesis, so the stories were fresh in my mind, and they leap out at you. If we're familiar with the entire Bible, then the images of inclusion and redemption echo very loud. It's remarkable how the stories of God's people, the family trees and the history, so often bring this redemption out of dark stories. And I don't say that to bring shallow comfort. I don't imagine, in fact I know, if you're going through any of the stories that were to do with Moab or to do with Tamar, if you're Rachel and Leah in those difficult marriages, those things are hard and difficult, and saying, oh well, God's going to work this all out, is not going to help you. And it's the same to us today. But I do wonder how those women would feel knowing what would be happening generations down the line, whether there is some comfort in thinking that it's part of God's plan somehow. I don't know. Either way, God's people did not shy away from putting those stories' beginnings and endings in the Bible. It doesn't hide the dirty starts of it. And so they marry. Back to Ruth and Boaz, and the Lord made Ruth conceive, so it says. This is one of two things in the book of Ruth attributed to God. He gave his people food again after the famine in Ruth 1, and then he causes Ruth and Boaz to get pregnant. There's a whole lot of stuff in Ruth 4, but that is one of the bit that pulled me up and go, I'm not comfortable with that. And I know that a sermon is not the place for the vicar to work out his therapy, but this is one of those bits that I'm wrestling with, and I share that with you so you know that it's okay to be wrestling with this stuff. Does God do that? Does God help people to conceive? Is he up there? Is he the director of conception of humankind everywhere, working out who gets pregnant and who does not? I'm uncomfortable with that. What about then people who don't have children, who have difficulties conceiving? I cannot square those things. I can't lay that pain at God's door. The Bible does have lots of stories of God getting involved in this, of helping particular people to conceive at particular times. All I can explain it as is, it seems that there are some people that God just needs to be born. There needs to be a baby Obed so that there can be a King David, so there can be a Jesus. There needs to be a Samuel the prophet, and that's how the story of Hannah works out. There needs to be a Jesus, so that's how the intervention with Mary comes about. But I can't explain that, and I'm not comfortable. And I lay that before you just so you know that it's okay to not be comfortable and have the answers. And do we know that these actions, the writer says, this was God. Do we know that's definitely the work of God and a miracle? and not simply something ascribed to him? I'm not sure. Like I say, I can't believe in a God who's pulling all the detailed strands of our lives like a puppet master. It doesn't seem loving. But nor can I believe in a God who never intervenes in the creation that he loves, because that doesn't seem loving either. So we're called in that tension to pray and to wrestle with it. And if that's bothering you, then write down a question or come see me and I'll pray with you. We do see the hand of God in this book. These people are blessed. They do have a child. I'm not sure if you'd call that a miracle. We've seen throughout the rest of the book that Ruth was very proactive and taking care of things, and I think a proactive approach to marriage might have led to this sort of outcome anyway. She's been a very practical lady. I'm not surprised that she got pregnant. And certainly we see God at work in things, even when Ruth is taking matters into her own hands. For the most part, the reconciling, redeeming, and inclusion we see in the book is brought about by the faithful, loving, generous choices of his people. And God is in those as much as if it's miraculous, as if he's just blessing and working through those people. I'm going to pick up one last moment in the story here. The son they conceive, that they've waited for many years, this is the outworking of presumably years of agony, they hand over to Naomi to care for, to be the primary care for. It's not just a bit of babysitting. The words used make it clear, like, you raised this son. How must that have felt for her to have a son to raise, having lost her husband and her sons? No replacement for those lost, but surely a source of joy. And what a gift it is for Ruth and Boaz to make their firstborn son given over for the sake of someone they love. What a foretaste of another son given over by God himself for the love of all of us. Naomi has had quite a journey in this book. She returned bitter and empty, and now her arms are full of love. It's another reminder to read the book in bigger chunks. If we just read Ruth 2, if we'd only seen who was Ruth 2? That was you, John, wasn't it? If we'd only met Naomi in Ruth 2, you'd think that she was just cross with God. You nasty old God, why have you done this to me, she said. Naomi was not to know then what we can see looking at her whole life. She didn't have that hindsight. You can't have it while you're in the middle of it. Things did get better. She does end up with a family and security and a home and a name to pass on. She is redeemed. And that's how this book ends, with this ever-widening redemption. Not only is Ruth redeemed and welcomed, included, Naomi is brought home and refilled and rehabilitated amongst her community. And then the son she has goes on to stand in the line of David. And David was this great king that was a blessing to all of Israel. All of the people of Israel were blessed through this union. Bethlehem, they said, may Bethlehem grow in name. Bethlehem is blessed by this story. Just a few centuries later, the prophet Micah says, the Messiah is going to be born here. And as Christians, we believe that he was. It's a passage familiar to us from Christmas readings. This short story, these lives, echo their influence through the rest of history for the people of Israel and now for all the people of God. What's been the point of the book of Ruth for us? What can we take away from it? Many things. When we come back to this in a few years, you'll get 4 completely different sermons with 4 completely different learns. It's been complicated, and there's many layers. But it has spoken to me this month about redemption and inclusion, about the God who redeems and includes us, and how Scripture points to that God. It's shown us a lot about how the Bible works as a whole, that it is more progressive and loving than it sometimes seems to be. A reminder that we understand it more and better when we read it in bigger chunks and when we know all of it, when we're familiar with its patterns and stories. It is not a simple book. It's not a book. It's many different books. But it's good that it contains clues to its own interpretation within it. We've learned about who gets included and redeemed in this book, that it is the unexpected, an outsider, someone prescribed, someone foreign. God is always looking to include and welcome those on the outside, those left behind. And we must always be asking ourselves who that is. Who is it that feels left out in the kingdom of God and seeking to be part of God's welcome? Ruth's redemption Comes to her through this combination of Boaz and Naomi's support and God's rules that were there to help those people on the outside, but through her own proactive engagement. It could be a book of, God helps those who help themselves. It's a very standard reading to take away from the book of Ruth. And that's there. Our redemption is like that. We're not deserving of being included in the family of God. We might be unexpected. If you were to think, am I the sort of person that God would go out of his way to make sure he's loved and included inside the love of the Trinity? Most of us would think, probably not. I'm not worthy. And that's what's different about our stories to Ruth's story. We get to stand in the family of God, in the love of the Trinity, but we don't have to be proactive to get that. We are called to work within it, that's true, but we are included however hard we have gleaned, whatever connections we've made. In fact, it's standing within that love that we get to say, I've been included. Let me see how I can go out and include others. As the gospel reminded us today, Jesus calls all of us to be salt and light, to be part of God's redeeming plan for ourselves and the whole of humanity, indeed the whole of creation. We are to be like Ruth, like Catherine in Happy Valley. We are to be actors of steadfast love. And you will never know what impact you are having as you live out your faith, as you act with that hesed that Sue talks so much about, that steadfast, holy love. In Ruth's small actions in her one life, she brought about exactly the blessing prayed for by the women of Bethlehem. She was part of the restoration, not only of herself, of her line, but of her town and her nation and the whole world. You are redeemed and included and loved. Live now in the light and peace of that. And read your Bibles more. Ruth 4, all of Ruth, worth coming back to.